You're not here because you're falling apart. You're here because you can't stop holding it together. There's a difference between someone who struggles with stress and someone who manages it constantly. You're the second kind, and that distinction matters more than most stress content will ever acknowledge. You don't just experience tension, you track it. You note when it rises, when it dips, what triggered it, what might be coming next. And somewhere underneath all that tracking is a belief, quiet, persistent, that if you stay prepared enough, you'll finally feel okay. That belief is worth examining, not to dismantle it, just to see it clearly. Here's the internal script most people in this loop recognize. I just need better routines. If I stay ahead of it, I'll be fine. I can't afford to let things slip. It sounds like discipline. It sounds like responsibility. From the outside, it looks like someone who has their life together. But there's something underneath the discipline that rarely gets named. It's not ambition. It's not conscientiousness. It's the sensation that something will go wrong if you stop watching. And that sensation doesn't respond to better strategies, because the strategies were never the point. The point was the watching. This is the structure of the loop. Trigger, anticipation, new strategy gathered, temporary relief, scan resumes, new threat detected, repeat. You've run this loop enough times that it no longer feels like a loop. It feels like how thinking works. It feels like who you are. But loops aren't identities. They're patterns, and patterns have origins. But at some point, and you may not remember when, staying alert became the way you kept things from falling apart. Not as a conscious decision, as an adaptation. Your mind learned that anticipating problems reduced their impact. That preparation created a margin of safety. That if you could see something coming, it hurt less when it arrived. That was a reasonable conclusion. It may have even been accurate. The problem isn't that the conclusion was wrong. The problem is that the mind generalized it, applied it forward, applied it broadly, until readiness stopped being a response to actual risk and became the baseline state. You're not stressed because you can't cope. You're stressed because you don't stop preparing. Patterns protect before they limit. That's not a criticism. That's a description of how protective systems work. They develop for good reasons. They stay past their usefulness, not because you're failing to update them, but because they became load-bearing. The monitoring feels necessary because somewhere underneath it is the belief that without it, something essential would be exposed. This is where the content usually pivots. 10 strategies, 5 daily habits, a framework for immediate relief. And if you've consumed enough of this kind of material, and you probably have, you know what happens next. Brief clarity, brief relief. Then the scan resumes, now with new material to organize. The accumulation of strategies inside an unexamined loop doesn't lower the baseline. It becomes part of the loop. New technique becomes new preparation. New preparation becomes new vigilance. The relief is real, but it's temporary. Not because the techniques are wrong, but because they're being used to manage something that hasn't yet been clearly seen. What you're managing isn't really stress. It's the discomfort of not being in control of what happens next. And that's a different problem than stress. It doesn't respond to optimization. It responds to something closer to recognition. Here's the friction point. You probably don't think of yourself as a controlling person. You think of yourself as responsible, prepared. Someone who takes things seriously and doesn't leave outcomes to chance. Those things can be simultaneously true and protective. Responsibility can be genuine, and it can also be the socially acceptable form of anxiety management, the version that earns praise instead of concern. Yeah, that looks like virtue from the outside while functioning as insulation on the inside. The discipline you've built, the systems, the planning, the constant orientation toward what comes next. Ask yourself honestly when that started feeling less like a choice and more like a requirement. What would happen if you didn't optimize yourself for 1 week? Not a breakdown, not neglect, just less management, less preparation for things that haven't happened yet, less monitoring of your own internal state. Most people sitting with that question find the answer is technically yes, they could do it. But the discomfort of imagining it is sharper than expected, because the bracing isn't just a behavior. It's become part of how you recognize yourself. That's the identity layer, or the place where the pattern stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are. You are not an anxious person. You are someone who learned, early, and for reasons that made sense, to preempt risk. There's a difference. The first is a fixed state. The second is a learned response running on old instructions. Protection always develops before freedom. Every system your mind built to manage uncertainty was built in response to something real. The hypervigilance, the constant planning, the discomfort with unpredictability. None of it appeared from nowhere. It developed because at some point the cost of being caught off guard felt higher than the cost of permanent readiness. And your nervous system made a calculation. Stay alert. It's safer. That calculation isn't a flaw. It's loyalty. A loyalty to a version of safety that made sense when it was built. Is it possible your nervous system is guarding something that once felt genuinely fragile? Not a threat from outside. Something internal. The question of what happens when you're not managing everything. The uncertainty of who you are when you're not being responsible. Prepared. Ahead of it. That's not a question that needs an answer right now. It's the kind of question that changes something just by being held. The 10 strategies exist. Breathwork, movement, structured rest, attention regulation, nervous system pacing, environmental anchors, social rhythm, cognitive reframing, acceptance practice, boundary clarity. Each of them is real. Each has evidence. None of them are wrong. But a strategy inside an unseen loop is just more loop. What changes something isn't the next technique. It's the moment the loop becomes visible, not as a failure, not as a diagnosis, but as a pattern that made sense once and has been running since. You're not failing at managing yourself. You are reacting to a system that has been on for a long time. That's the whole thing. A reaction, not a verdict, not a flaw, just a pattern, one that protected something before it started costing you.